Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name's Phil Gallagher. I run Thraben University, and according to all of you in chat, I'm the dean. And with me here, I have Grand Prix competitor Bob Huang.
Oh, thank you. That is quite an accolade. I'm really thankful that both you and Mike have called me out today as being a Grand Prix competitor.
It's in that commercial too. I don't know if you realized that.
Yeah, no. That's what I was referring to. It was like Grand Prix champion Jarvis Yu and Grand Prix competitor.
But really, for anyone who's not familiar with Bob's work, he basically crushes Legacy all of the time and has either invented or innovated some portions of decks that have really caused them to skyrocket in terms of their playability. Were you the one who broke Treasure Cruise? I feel like that was at least partially your fault.
At least partially mine. I can take partial credit on that one. But yeah, no, I'm super excited to be here. I think we're going to have an exciting match for you guys. We have Caleb Durward against Jody Keith. And they're not quite set up yet, so I'm not going to reveal decks until they get on stream. Oh, well, now they're set up on and on stream. So let's talk about these two decks. Caleb Durward, once known as, the builder of many different legacy decks, such as Rug Delver and Survival, is now apparently the Chalice guy because he went from Bomberman to a different Chalice deck. This one is called Steel Stompy. Some people call it Affinity. And it looks like we're about to get started. So he's going to be playing against Jody Keith, who's on Landstill. Jody's going to be playing blue-white Landstill this time, so he cut the red entirely. So this will be an interesting matchup.
Let's take just a minute to talk about the deck list before we get started. So what makes this Steel Stompy deck good? Why would someone want to register this versus something like, say, Eldrazi? That's another powerful linear Chalice deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. I think the Steel Stompy deck, it's tough to say which one has better draws. Obviously, Eldrazi has the Eldrazi lands, so those are better. But on the other hand, I've seen Steel Stompy get some really busted draws, on multiple Thorns, multiple Chalices, multiple Lone Stones. So it has harder lock pieces than Eldrazi does. So really the difference between the two decks are do you want big dumb creatures or do you want lock pieces? So lock pieces are significantly better against, say, a deck like Storm, whereas the generally larger Eldrazi creatures might be better against decks like Delver.
I found that the Steel Stompy deck can also wiggle through decks that can't close games quickly because the various engines with +1/+1 counters in this deck can do surprisingly broken things. Mm-hmm. You have Arcground Ravager, you sack your board to it, you throw all the counters onto Walking Ballista, and then you get to just laser your opponent to the face. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of room to make mistakes when playing against Steel Stompy if you just don't respect the deck and you've never done any playtesting versus it.
That's fair. Want to talk about Landstill for a bit? So This is kind of Jody's take on the deck. This deck used to see a ton of play, really before Miracles became a thing. And so now, I guess the number one deck to compare and contrast to is Miracles. So Miracles does have Terminus. Landstill does not. Instead, Landstill gets to play Mishra's Factory and Wasteland, along with Standstill, which is kind of still probably a better card advantage engine than anything Miracles has. But in exchange, you don't have the Broken Sweeper.
This deck is also heavier on early removal than Miracles is. In addition to the stock 4 Swords to Plowshares of a deck like Miracles, you have 2 Path to Exile as well. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to just get got by as many early Delver starts, for example.
Yeah, and putting Path to Exile in your deck really just says hey, I'm okay if I get a 2-for-1 on the other side, as long as I keep getting to play Magic and I can recoup all those cards back with a card like Standstill. So it looks like he is splashing black, which is kind of interesting. I'm kind of curious what that's for. Maybe just for engineered explosives. But yeah, it looks
I'm going to skim over that deck list. I didn't actually see any black cards other than Surgical.
Yeah, so I guess it's for Surgical and EE. Yeah. But it looks like they're here and they've been sitting for a while, so let's let them get started.
All right, let's battle. So this Steel Stompy opener is not stellar. There's 2 City of Traders, which are soul lands that accelerate, but there's not anything too impressive to accelerate into right now.
Mm-hmm. Looks like the sides might be switched again. We'll get it fixed in a second. So, yeah, like you said, the Steel Stompy hand doesn't have too much to accelerate into. On the other hand, Jody did have to take a mulligan, so he's down on a couple cards, and doesn't really have particularly interactive cards. So, all right, looks like we're going to take a quick break while we fix the setup, but we can keep talking about their decks. So yeah, let's see, what does Jody have? He has the standard 3 Snapcaster Mages, kind of go really well in blue control decks, and is one of the reasons to play a blue control deck, as well as, just a lot of counter magic and removal.
Yeah, if I were going to like point to one thing that I like really like about this deck list, it is the whopping 3 actual factual counter spells that we see. Like when paired with the Snapcaster Mages, I just feel like against a slow Steel Stompy start, that can be really devastating.
He also is playing Crucible of Worlds, so that's a good engine as well to be able to Crucible Wasteland.
Yeah, that can get everything in the deck except for the indestructible Darksteel Citadels. Those are staying forever. Steel Stompy is like surprisingly reliant on its lands. Like you have man lands to help close the games. You have the soul lands to kind of like really make your huge number of 2-drops more potent. So like attacking that deck with Wasteland is very good, even though it itself is a Wasteland deck.
Yep, and it looks like we got the sides fixed for you guys, so looks like we're about to get started. But yeah, it looks like pretty much Jody led on the Underground Sea, kind of interesting line to kind of bluff what he's playing. And Caleb is going for an upkeep Wasteland to play around Stifle, yep. And Jody floats the mana. It was interesting to watch Jarvis play this weekend. He played against Death and Taxes a few times, and he just always floated mana, even if he had nothing to cast. Personally, I don't really do that because, like, it's clear I don't have anything. Like, I only float mana if I do have something. But, I don't know. Do you have any take on that?
Yeah, so sometimes when my opponent floats mana, even if I don't think they have anything, I need to respect the possibility that they might. So if I have, like, double port, I might port you once in upkeep. If you float, I'll port you once in draw step. But if you like don't float, then I'm just going to port you again in upkeep. So like there is some like actual factual upside to floating if your opponent has multiple ports.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I guess it's one thing I should be more mindful of in the future. Stand still. Not the best on this board state when your opponent has a Steel Overseer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so like now we're going to see like Ravager, Overseer, Ballista, all working together to do sweet things.
Yeah, and you also really showcase the power of City of Traders here. Yeah, City of Traders is kind of card disadvantage, but honestly, he got 2 activations out of the first city, and it's already almost worth a card. It's kind of like a ritual, like a weird ritual, and it's totally going to be worth it to kind of go down on lands just to set this up. Now, Jody did show the Underground Sea, so Caleb's probably not thinking Terminus at this point. He's probably thinking, oh, maybe you have something like a Supreme Verdict, if he's thinking Esper Blade, which is probably what I would be thinking at this point.
That is what I would be doing as well.
Yeah, so he knows he has some time to just really put the screws on and kind of try to win this game early before he gets set up with his Wraths.
So I definitely thought that like Caleb's opening hand was kind of weak, but with drawing what he did in the first 2 turns here, it actually turned into an incredibly insane hand.
Yeah. So what did he have to start? I think he had Vault Scourge and Ravager,
like
but he drew the Overseer.
Double Soul Land, Wasteland, something approximating that.
Yeah. All right.
And drawing that other 2-drop was stellar.
That was a much faster match than I anticipated, or game rather. And now we're going to get to see both players sideboard. So from Caleb's side, he's probably just assuming Esper. Like, all he's got were 3 lands, right? So
I'd be pretty inclined to be thinking about Sorceress Spyglass, thinking about, like, equipment and Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd probably play the Karn as well. Just, like, if you know you're probably up against, like, some controlling deck of some nature, that's just, like, a great late-game hard to have.
Right. Agree completely on the Karn.
As far as some of the other cards go, it's a little harder to tell from there. Like, he could think that, like, Warping Whale generically might be fine. Like, it answers things like Stoneforge Mystic. And it can also counter some annoying things, like, say, a Council's Judgment or something like that. But I don't know that would actually be good enough.
Yeah. All right, so that's interesting. He's bringing in the Karn. On Jody's side, he is bringing in all his, anti-artifact stuff, so 2 disenchants and a null rod. And he's taken out his clicks, which don't match up well against Ballista, and shaving a standstill as well, which I like. Yeah,
he's also going to get 1 more Supreme Verdict out of the board.
Yep. Yeah, so this matchup's pretty much about stabilizing and then hitting a Wrath, and then it'll be really hard for Caleb's deck to come back from there.
So, of note, just to talk about Null Rod a bit, since some of the Steel Stompy lands are, in fact, artifact lands, they can just stop those from doing anything. Just turn them into just stone-cold bricks. They just sit there and do nothing other than contribute to Metalcraft.
Sure. That's a fair point. Yeah, Null Rod's a card I really like right now, given how good Death and Taxes is. And I also think Storm and Steel Stompy are decks that people are playing. So if you are not playing any artifact synergies, you should strongly consider putting a Null Rod in your sideboard because it's highly effective against a few top tier decks right now. It's also effective against the big Eldrazi build that relies on Grim Monoliths.
That deck terrifies me, by the way. Yeah. I think that deck is probably better than people give it credit for, but since it's like a Chalice big mana deck, I don't think many people would actually pick it up and try it.
Right. Yeah, I've playtested the quote-unquote medium size of the deck that had the Cloud Posts and Ballistas and Sowers, but didn't play ridiculous amounts of big Eldrazi, just played I think 1 or 2 Ulamogs. And I was impressed with some of its matchups, having 4 Ballista is huge. But yeah, let's talk about this game since we're getting back started. Looks like Jody had to mulligan again, and he's going to probably keep this hand of 6 with a removal spell and a Crucible.
Caleb's hand is a little questionable.
He only has 1 mana source, so... he has an Opal. He has an Opal. Yeah.
In the top 2 cards, this hand does become relatively good. Especially if that land is an ancient tomb in particular. Yep. So I can understand wanting to keep this, but this is absolutely the sort of hand where if he goes and bricks on a land for maybe even just 1 or 2 turns, the game might just be over in the other direction.
Right. Because he literally can cast Mox Opal, which doesn't have Metalcraft, so he literally won't be doing anything until he draws another land. Or artifact, I suppose, to turn on the Metalcraft. Yeah, it looks like Moto has been a little bit weird today. There's a standard default setup that when you make a game, whoever makes the game is on one side. But for whatever reason, maybe since the update, it's been kind of bizarre and it's not doing the defaults that usually happen. So that's why you're seeing people quote unquote on the wrong side. So the bottom of the board should actually be Caleb, and we'll probably try to get that fixed in a little bit.
So, of note, Caleb did go and get his land so that he will be able to probably deploy Chalice on his turn 2 and follow it up with Thorn. And once those are in play, we can start talking about getting some threats on the board.
And Chalice is going to be excellent here. You see Jody drew another Swords to Plowshares, which is a good draw, but lines up terribly against Chalice of the Void.
So for those of you kind of unfamiliar with these so-called prison decks, the way that you generally want to sequence your cards is usually not to get overly aggressive. You usually start by trying to hinder your opponent. And once you've really decreased their ability to play a game of Magic, it's then that you start trying to win the game. So the cards like Chalice and Thorn are going to be prioritized. And then once we kind of move to the mid-game, the second stage of the game, that's when we'll start seeing the 2-drop creatures hitting play.
So Jody actually drew one of his best possible draws. He drew a Wasteland, which is going to buy him a ton of time here, as Caleb isn't really able to make any plays until he draws, another artifact or land. So even more importantly, he has a Crucible too. So if Caleb doesn't hit on this next turn, his Caracas is also going to go bye-bye. So even against this Chalice of the Void here, I think Jody is actually in a reasonable spot.
Agreed. And this is kind of why I was a little worried about Caleb's hand, because like if he misses on land or if something happens to a land, he's just dead.
Mm-hmm.
I also think I dislike the early concession. I think I would have played that one out for a little bit longer to gain some information.
Yeah, well, actually, now thinking back, like in the blind in the dark, I for sure 100% would have put Jody on Esper Blade. But given what Jody played last week, maybe Caleb had some sense that he might be just playing Esper Landstill, for example. But either way, I agree. I think you maybe could have played it out a little bit longer, figured out what the win condition was. But I think the match was, 95% over, given that he didn't really have any way to play spells unless he just drew like running Darksteel Citadels.
Yes, there's very few scenarios in which Caleb even gets to put up anything resembling a fight that game. Let's be real.
Yeah, but still, to me, it's like you're in the Legacy Premier League. I feel like if you had a 1% chance, maybe you just keep playing. So now we're going back to Caleb's drawing board, and he's like, okay, this is Landstill. My Ballistas are going to be a little bit less useful because they're not going to be able to pick off, something like a Stoneforge Mystic. And Spyglass is going to be a little bit more useful to protect her against Crucible Wasteland, Jace, Mishra's Factory. So Caleb's making some adjustments here.
Yeah, so now we're seeing something closer to what I had suggested before with Sorcerer Spyglass, for things like Jace that he might see, and also just for the lands. And the Karn is also going to be relatively good against this deck if we kind of start to reach the later stages of the game. Although I think this deck can theoretically pump one out on like turn 1 or something like that. I think when you get like some of the Soul Land Mox openers, it's possible.
Yeah, you can go Tomb, Petal Mox. Like that's more than enough. But yeah, it's definitely a possibility.
So I don't think Jody has changed anything on his side. I wasn't watching his side carefully, but it looks the same to me.
Yeah, I think he already knew what he's facing, whereas Caleb was the one who had to make a couple adjustments. All right, fingers crossed that everything's on the right side this time. Yep, that looks good.
Hey, looking good.
Caleb's going to have to mulligan. His only mana source was a factory. Fortunately, it looks like he mulliganed to a similar situation. Jody, I can't tell if that's a 6 or a 7. If it's a 6, he mulliganed awfully quickly too. So
give us one moment as we get screens updated and resized here, and then we'll give you some more insightful commentary.
Yeah, I think it was actually a 7. The problem with the 7 is that there was no white mana source. So I'm a little bit curious. Ooh, wow. So Jody ended up keeping, but it looks like Caleb's down to 4 cards potentially.
It might be 5, and we might just not be able to see one.
Yeah, so Jody's
unsure.
So Jody did mulligan the hand that had no white sources, and then he's keeping a Snapcaster Mage on top.
Yeah, chat, bear with us for a moment. We as commentators are seeing something different than what you are seeing on screen.
Looks like Caleb mulliganed to 4. That's awful. You don't want to go out this way.
Caleb's hand is such, though, that if he top decks a land and nothing else were to happen to him in the first turn cycle, he could have a chance. If I were Jody there, I would have snapped off Wasteland on Wasteland, though.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, with the second Wasteland, so here he gets a hold of Spell Pierce, so he is somewhat protected against nonsense. Maybe he was saving the Wasteland to try and get a higher value land, like, say, an Ancient Tomb, for example. But it looks like it's going to work out for him either way.
Yeah, my general strategy when my opponent mulls to 5 or fewer cards is almost just under any circumstances, just trade cards.
Yeah.
Like, as quickly as possible, as aggressively as possible. All right. So sticking a Thorn is nice. It's not going to do a ton because like Jody will just be able to play around that. Like he has plenty of lands currently.
Mm-hmm.
And the Thorn actually may end up working against Caleb depending on like which portions of the deck that he top decks here. This is going to be a rough one.
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me.
The best draw here would probably be Darksteel Citadel, so that he could like get a third land that would also give him Metalcraft to like get the Etch Champion into play protected.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, Supreme Verdict would just eat it in another turn or two.
Yeah. So Jody's taking an interesting line of not wastelanding Caleb. I think it's because he can, afford to answer whatever Caleb plays, and then he's just really valuing the wasteland highly because he wants to take down a Salt land.
So if you're
we'll
Jody,
see if that calculus changes.
Would you play a Standstill?
I think so. Like, the other deck doesn't have man lands, so why not? Looks like he disagrees with me. What's your take?
Like, I feel like you wait one
or
more
actually,
turn,
that's
right?
wrong. I think the Steel Stompy deck does play Factory, but you have your own
You have more
wasteland,
factories.
and you have more factories. So
I think you wait one turn, you play Jace, and then if you get to untap with the Jace, you can just like slam a Standstill, and you have like Jace under Standstill along with 2 man lands, and you have such a wealth of riches you can never lose.
Yeah, that is literally 100% game over. So, yeah, basically because he had the Jace, he was like, you know what, Jace is going to be good enough. I can afford to wait a turn. And his Jace is, like, insulated from a Ballista. Like, he could go Ancient Tomb Ballista, but that still wouldn't really kill the Jace. So I like going for a Brainstorm here.
Yeah, Jody has a wealth of riches at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably at the point where Caleb is less than 10% to win this game, maybe even less than 5%.
Yeah, I mean, all right. So Caleb does get to Spyglass this turn, and because of the Thorn,
good.
Yeah, because of the Thorn, there's no way to Force of Will this. So he gets to keep playing Magic. The question is for how many more turns. Yeah, he's naming Jace. Like, Jace the Mind Sculptor is just so much better than every other thing going on in Legacy, pretty much, that there's just no question. You always name Jace. Yes, this Wasteland is going to be excellent. Yes, the Factory's, like, probably going to beat him to death, but you still got to name Jace.
Yeah, so this might be the Standstill turn, now that, like, the Jace is locked out.
Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting line, going after the Wasteland instead of the City of Traders.
He's valuing his win conditions here.
Yeah.
So he's allowing Caleb, giving him the grace of being able to cast spells at some point. But with triple Factory even, one Wasteland remaining isn't going to get through that wall.
It's funny how well Factory matches up against Etch Champion as well.
Oh man, that had not occurred to me. That's brutal. So for those of you unfamiliar with Legacy All-Star Etch Champion, if it has Metalcraft, it gets protection from all colors. Unfortunately, the factories are colorless, so it is just a 3-mana 2/2 in regards to them. Yep.
Looks like Caleb's probably going to go for a Chalice into an Etch Champion. Or actually, he can't actually play both this turn because of the Thorn. So we'll see what he goes for. He could deploy the Etch Champion, which will be safe unless Caleb answers one of his other artifacts. So he's maybe weighing that. The problem is that, like, the game's just not going to get too much better for him. So, I mean, there's so many problems on Caleb's side. Like, the Etch Champions don't do that much, and he's still, falling multiple cards behind.
All right, so What does the world look like where Caleb can come back from this scenario?
I mean, after
let's ignore all of those counter spells over in Jody's hand. But what does that world look like? What would he possibly have to do?
Yeah, I mean, before he drew 3 off the Landstill, I would say he maybe had like a 5% chance. Now with those, okay, he used one of the forces, but he still has 2 forces back, or a force plus counterspell, snap counterspell. There just isn't. Oh, and a verdict. Why not? There isn't a realistic way for Caleb to get back in this. Like, he doesn't play cards like, for example, Cavern of Souls to forces things through the counter magic. In general, I feel like the Steel Stompy deck is weaker to the blue decks than Eldrazi, because Eldrazi has a lot of built-in ways to get around those blue cards.
To clarify, though, the blue counterspell decks,
right?
Whereas Steel Stompy tends to be better against the blue combo decks, things like Ant or Show and Tell, because you have more sort of main deck hard interaction.
Fair enough. Yep.
So if Caleb were to get his way back into this game, I think it would have to start with a Sorcerous Spyglass on Factory. Obviously, that wouldn't resolve, but that would be a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at this point, Jody's in hard control of the game, but he just wants to make sure he's keeping up counter magic every turn. So he's going to hold up the counter spell. Question is if he holds up Snapcaster Mage plus Spell Pierce and Snapcaster Mage Brainstorm as well, and it looks like he's choosing to do that. Or actually, no, he needed 3 lands for counter spell, so he has the hold up, 2 blue sources plus another land.
Although he could have tapped Factory to sneak 1 more damage in. If his plan is just hard cast counter spell.
Fair point, but I guess he wanted to have the option to Snapcaster Spell Pierce just to get the Snapcaster out of his hand and get a little bit more pressure on.
It would also leave the opportunity to both counterspell and Force of Will.
Yep. So yeah, when you're this far ahead, you just leave yourself not vulnerable.
The chat suggests Black Source into Mind Twist would be acceptable as a starting point.
See, I think that card should be legal, but it currently isn't. So
I guess we're still on no outs then.
So we're still on no outs. Caleb's really good, but I don't know if he can show up with banned cards that he didn't register.
50-50. It's a strong maybe.
Yeah. So here it looks like Jody's just going for a Snapcaster Brainstorm. Just keep turning the screws.
Ooh, chat also brings up that disconnecting for 24 minutes is an alternate win condition.
That is true. Although in the LPL, I don't know if we would be happy if that happened. We might try to find some workaround should Jody disconnect.
Right. Should Jody disconnect or get hit by a meteor, we'd probably figure something out.
Well, if you got hit by a meteor, I kind of feel like Caleb would advance by default. I feel like we're going to see a scoop here. Maybe he'll play the Edge Champion. Why not? All right, play the Mox Opal. Sure.
All right. There's some mana. I guess this Ballista for 2, if there's no removal on the other side, could theoretically start growing bigger by 1 every turn.
It does cost him 2 life, though. And Jody's just having none of this. He's just I don't really care about my cards. I'm just going to keep trading, and you're going to be dead in a couple turns. He's dealing 6 this turn and 6 the next. I like how he has this Underground Sea just for surgical and engineered explosives. Why not?
There's very, very little cost to doing so, and the upside of being able to sweep off True Name and Liliana Last Hope and things of that ilk, it's pretty high.
Agreed. See, now Jody's left with an Ancient Tomb, which, yeah, it doesn't do quite what you want to do when you're at 4 life.
Yeah, this is Ballista to
trade with a
block
Snapcaster.
A Factory, then trade with a Snapcaster. So it's like a fog for a turn.
Jody's just going to fire off a path or a plow here. I guess... Well, he's at 4, so shouldn't he just... Well, okay, I guess it doesn't make too much of a difference because he's going to shoot off the Snapcaster Mage. Yeah. And so he decided he wanted to keep the path instead because that doesn't gain him life.
Yeah,
Still going to turn off this Ancient Tomb, so Jody's, effectively has no outs. This game went on a lot longer than I kind of expected it to.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb tried to fight, despite the mulligan into oblivion there. And there were turns where perfect draws could have given him a chance.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like it was close at all because even with the Etch champions, Jody had the factories. So he could have. It would have been into a stalemate situation where neither player was attacking necessarily. And Jody knew Caleb had no card, so he just wanted to turn the screws. So. All right, that is it for Week 5 of the Legacy Premier League. Next week, we're going to be doing similar to what we did this week, but the losers bracket instead. And so the stakes are even higher in the losers bracket. It's win or go home.
So, Bob, what happens to everyone who lost tonight?
Everyone who's lost tonight basically goes down into the losers bracket, and they will play the winner of whoever wins next week in the losers bracket. So it's kind of an interesting setup where it's double elimination, so everybody gets a second chance. I kind of like that.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. So if one of your favorites lost tonight, don't worry, you will get to see them again. I want to take this opportunity to once again thank our sponsors who are helping to make this happen. That's Card Hoarder, Cardboard.live, MTG First, and the Epic Storm.
EpicStorm.com is where I think Wilson Hunter mentioned that he likes to get his groceries there, so check him out.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I need some, apples, #1 place to shop. Beats the heck out of Kroger. Also, some decent articles there from time to time, too. All right, so do we have anything else we need to do before we sign off here? Julian, are you going to tag in, give us some closing remarks or anything of that nature, or should we just close it? All right. Thank you all for watching the Legacy Premier League. We will be back next Wednesday, once again at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we hope to see you there. I'm Phil Gallagher.
And I'm Bob Huang, signing off. Take care, guys.
Jam some games of Legacy. See you soon.